Hi there everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Copilot Lead Speak. I'm your host Sarah Young, and as we've been doing throughout this series, I have the pleasure of talking to some leading figures in the AI security space. In this video, I'm sitting down with Tori. Welcome, Tori.
Thanks so much for having me.
So before we start, I think as we've done with everybody who's been on the couch with me, can you tell me a little bit about who you are, what you do, and why you're talking to me today?
Of course. My name's Tori Westerhoff, and I work on Microsoft's AI Red Team. And I specifically work around our responsible AI red teaming. So thinking about the ethics and the safety of the AI systems and products that Microsoft puts out.
You're probably pretty busy at the moment, I'm sure. But I'm intrigued as to how you got into this role, because AI red teaming, of course, specifically, is a very new field of work. So what is your background? How did you end up in this role?
I always joke I have a very zigzag resume. But this role in particular and the function of responsible AI red teaming really does benefit from having that diverse zig and zag of experience. So I studied cognitive neuroscience, specifically around unconscious decision making. And then I spent my early career in national security. And I got into Microsoft actually through my MBA program and working in diversity and inclusion data science. And then took a very brief stint in metaverse and AR, VR, and now find myself in this role. And what I found in this particular function is that having depth of experience and understanding in all of those different facets where we look for harms to humans and our customers really helps in probing the systems that we're putting out. So it's been great to put all those puzzle pieces of me together in one spot.
I have to say, some of this stuff, because red teaming is always exciting, but now this new AI red teaming and the responsibility side of it is really, really interesting to me. But I just wondered if we could back up for a second, and could you talk for the audience, if anyone doesn't know, a little bit more about what you mean when we say responsible AI?
I'd love to. So when we think about responsible AI, specifically around Microsoft's perspective on it, we are really committed to creating AI that's safe by design. And we have core principles around fairness and transparency that are trying to create these systems in a way that really prevent the harms that we all worry about with the kind of massive and changing scope of AI in a human-centric way. So when we're thinking about responsible AI, we think of those societal harms, we think about individual harms, and we think of your traditional security harms. So a lot of AI red teaming actually parlays perfectly into our history and security red teaming and how that term is often used. So I think that it's a mixed bag of both security red teaming and moving towards this innovation future of how AI is integrating into society and how people interact with tech.
So Tori, we've talked about what responsible AI is, but then of course we've got to get into AI red teaming. I think of all the bits of AI security, I think it's one of the ones that people find the most intriguing and has had quite a bit of press. So can you talk a little bit about how AI red teaming at Microsoft works and what our approach is?
Of course. So AI red teaming really comes from the history of security red teaming, which has a robust kind of double-blind, adversarial, really well-earned tool system of how to figure out vulnerabilities in the security space of tech. And with the introduction of machine learning and large language models, those vulnerabilities actually really expand in the way that the systems and tech interact with humans. And so along with that security adversarial red teaming methodology, we have two other buckets in AI red teaming. One is adversarial ML techniques, machine learning techniques. Examples include jailbreaking or cross-prompt injection, really working with the way that AI systems introduce new interactions that can be used by adversaries. And there's this third bucket that's also just prompt generated, right? It's working with the UX of new technology. It's working in the way that customers interact with our products and all the products out there to understand how benign and adversarial prompts and interactions could lead to harms for humans. So we have a really expansive, kind of evolved definition of what red teaming could be as it applies to AI. And Microsoft really invests in all three of those when we think about safety for our AI tech.
Tori, could you go into a little bit more detail? Maybe give us some generic attack examples of in some of those buckets that you described, because I love to nerd out on these things, and I'd love to know a little bit more detail about exactly, some of these, particularly the new kinds of attacks and attack vectors that we have in the AI space.
Happily. So like I said, we have these three kind of ideas and methodologies. In traditional security, we are still testing for the vulnerabilities that you think of in red teaming for security. So think kind of hard-coded keys and being able to hack through the layers of an entire tech stack. Yeah. In adversarial ML, we're normally working with more the UX or a direct API into the technology. And two of the attacks that I mentioned, jailbreak and cross-prompt injection, are really common in the kind of threat community, let's call it. Yeah. Cross-prompt injection is a great example where if you're embedding linked information into a benign interaction with a chatbot, for example, having that chatbot actually access the adversarial linked content is a methodology to introduce the adversarial component without it actually being in the core text or the core input to tech. So that's kind of an example of how the adversarial ML techniques are starting to evolve with the way that the systems are. And then the third methodology is really based on how we feel users can interact with technology. So thinking about how phrases or key terms and communication around particular topics need to be communicated safely and accurately by all of our systems and products.
Yeah, I think that last one is probably the one that most people are familiar with when they think of bad things you could potentially do with the AI, but clearly there's much more to it than that. There's quite a few layers, as you say.
Exactly. I work a lot in that third bucket. When we think about the expansiveness of responsible AI, the expansiveness is really limited by the ways that harm can happen to humans. And so we do a lot of prompting across the board in the ways that we want people to feel safe. And it's an interesting methodology because it doesn't require that you do a lot of coding and hacking. You want to be able to emulate how customers will interact with a system so they're really, really safe while using it.
So Microsoft has been doing a lot of cutting-edge work in the AI space generally, and even our red team is, I think, arguably one of the first ones in the industry. So can you talk a little bit more about how Microsoft actually keeps all of our platforms safe? Because a lot of people want to know, understandably so, of course.
Happy to tell them. So you're right, we do have kind of a long history in AI red teaming and trying to push the thought leadership of how security red teaming really needs to evolve and append in these ways that ML and LLM technology pushes vulnerabilities and attack surfaces. We have a operations shop. So when I'm talking about kind of the ML adversarial methods or the prompt methods, that is a suite of techniques that we use on operations in order to create a really robust understanding of the vulnerabilities or attack surfaces of a single product. And we consider that kind of our operations shop. But we have three kind of buckets of creating safety. And operations really start to inform how we research that bleeding edge, how we evolve these techniques, and how we understand how threat actors are working in the wild to better kind of advance our protections against that. And then our third element is a tooling team that's working to automate and really evolve red teaming tech at the same pace that the AI technology is evolving, so that the safety is always hand in hand with the evolution of the industry. So the red teaming approach is not just red teaming, but it's really a investment on why it's important for the technology to go out and benefit humans, right? To empower all the people on the planet. And it requires all three of those, the research, the tooling, and the operations to inform a perspective and also just get things done, right? Make sure the things that are releasing are as safe as they can be.
So Tori, when you were talking about your background before, you mentioned that you've done lots of work in diversity. So I'm keen to hear how that work has influenced what you're doing now in the AI red teaming space.
I think diversity in red teaming is actually the key to success. It is the secret sauce in understanding the broadness with depth of the attack surface of a product. So I had worked in D&I data strategy, but I also worked in national security. I have my MBA, so I understand these finance pieces, and I pull from every different experience across these different industries and these different techniques when trying to really get my arms around where the harms in a system could be. So having the language and kind of knowing where harms could happen in those different spaces comes from recruiting people with really different backgrounds, the unexpected folks who are going to think really differently, and having a team that as closely represents the diversity of our users and the people we want to protect is so core to effective red teaming. And I think that goes both in background, that goes both in career experience, but it also goes in approach, right? And just having a super creative mindset and trying to be a learn-it-all as we keep up with the industry. So I think it's a core tenet to our team and Microsoft's approach to it.
Tori, I'm thinking that with all these new techniques and new parts of red teaming that are coming to the fore now, that we're going to see a need for a lot of fresh skill sets as well in this space. So what are your thoughts there?
I'm definitely evidence of it. I hope that this is the trend. I believe that this is the trend. I think traditional security framing and mindset is so key to red teaming. It's really core to the tradition of it, but these techniques are evolving rapidly. And so the skill sets that make you really good at it or the skill sets that make you ahead of the curve on it are completely different, right? They're evolving just as quickly as the tech does. And I think that opens aperture for people with wildly different, non-traditional security backgrounds to really have a perspective and to drive how, especially on the responsible AI side, tech firms respond and increase safety for the folks that they serve.
I think that's really exciting to get some like I said, fresh skill sets in.
Yeah, I think that this team that I'm currently on is the most diverse team I've ever worked with. And we're constantly in that loop of research, operations, and tooling. We're constantly feeding off one another on different avenues to push the boundary for it. And so curiosity combined with hyper kind of hack till you drop an adversarial mindset is core to moving the team forward and kind of getting that new red team like in AI culture going.
I'll be keeping an eye out for your team's job adverts, it sounds like. No, not for my boss who might be watching. So Tori, does your team, I'm keen to understand more about this, does your team just work on a specific product then? Or do you get to red team across the Microsoft estate? How does that work?
So red teaming is part and parcel with product development at Microsoft. So the team that is bringing tech to life, the devs, the PMs, they are all red teaming and first and foremost kind of bringing it through all of the stages of that development. Microsoft AI red team is an independent red team. And so we don't sit in a particular product space, but we actually red team across the entire industry suite of Microsoft. So we see a ton of tech. And I actually think that's a really large advantage because we see a lot of different ways and attack surfaces of adversaries. And that helps us kind of sharpen our tools and our instinct for all of our operations.
So a question a lot of customers have been asking, and I know I have been asked this question, is that they may have their own red team functions, but they don't know or they're unsure how to start an AI-specific red team function because, of course, it's very new. So do you have any advice for organizations out there that want to or feel they need to start an AI red team? Where would you advise they start with this? Because essentially, it's kind of a new function.
Starting with their red teams is a great place. That adversarial mindset is super key. And like we've talked about before, a big chunk of what our AI red team does is traditional security in the context of AI tech. So that culture and really understanding how adversaries think is super crucial to building out any red team. In the AI space, we've also talked about these new skills and some of these methodologies that are even crowdsourced oftentimes, right? Just in the way that prompts and inputs are being put into AI tech. And that's the space where I would encourage folks to get really creative and think about the perspective that someone could bring. So background experience or different cultural contexts. Experiences where people really have been kind of mission-oriented around protecting folks and trying to drive safety. That mindset, plus a little curiosity on AI tech generally, I think is the magic recipe of how to get an AI red team started and build the culture of how to evolve it super quickly as the tech evolves too.
Yeah, because I have to say I've seen some stats that the rate of adoption of AI is the fastest ever, I think, for some technology. It's crazy fast.
It's rapid, and we feel it. So moving at that speed is super important for red teaming too. So the adversarial space is just going to move just as fast. And understanding that play where you always have to be a few steps ahead of the folks who are trying to use this tech for bad is probably also a core tenet that you want to underscore as you're creating that team.
But as ever with security, trying to stay a couple of steps ahead of the bad guys is always going to be a challenge, no matter which bit of red teaming we're talking about, right?
It's certainly what makes it interesting.
Tori, I think I could talk to you about AI red teaming for the rest of today, probably the week, but I need to let you go home, so we'll wrap it up there. But thank you so much for joining us.
It's been a joy. I really appreciated the time.
And for those of you who are tuning in at home, I hope you've really enjoyed today's episode of deep diving into AI red teaming. Join us for another exciting episode of Copilot Leet Speak. My name's Sarah Young. See you next time, and take care.